Yeah, I think at some point we can start, and this point probably starts right now. Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, for those who don't know me, let me introduce myself. So, my name is Oleksii. I'm a civilian co-founder in Fulcrum. Uh, so, I was right now living in the second most beautiful city in Ukraine, in Kiev, and was born in the first most beautiful city in Ukraine, Odessa. Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of can hear myself from the room next to me. So if you guys can uh, do the volume a bit lower, that would be fantastic. Yeah. So previously, I had some experience outsourcing myself. This particular designs took my vendor to create in half a year. That's quite a timeline for this number of screens and the concept. And I feel that I had quite an complicated experience outsourcing myself. And from the photo and how I look like on it, you can probably understand that I'm not extremely happy about the work done. Yeah. So, and after that, I decided that probably it's possible to provide a much better service when outsourcing. And at some point, I've joined Fulcrum, and right now we are around 70 people and have created many projects for clients worldwide and have some experience in, from the vendor side to understand how to deliver good products and how to detect whether there are some issues or not. And from another hand, we have outsourced some of the chunks of work from our side to other agencies and have experience choosing those agencies ourselves. So I think that's quite an experience for detecting whether the vendor you're planning to work with is going to do a good job or it's going to be some, I don't know, pitfalls and there are going to be some complications along the way. Yeah, so today we're going to focus on how to choose the right vendor for you for the job being done, how to choose the right software development partner, and how to understand along the way whether you're going to have some extremes in the end or if everything going to be delivered as promised and as discussed. And probably the more typical issues which you can stumble upon while searching on the internet on how choosing the vendor or just some horror stories that there are some sometimes vendors just don't deliver. So there are projects which you have outsourced and the outcome is probably nothing and you've lost thousands of dollars. On the other hand, it's pretty common that the work which is being done is not done properly and it's just low quality. And another one is that the deadlines you have discussed in the very beginning are somewhat not being delivered, and in the end, you understand that the project is half a year or a year late. Yeah, so we're gonna try to go through all of the main points of your communication with vendor and understand how to perform or how to act in the way that you won't have these typical issues in the end. Yeah. So where it all begins is initiation. It's basically when you are looking for a vendor and you try to, from the, I don't know, hundreds of agencies worldwide, you're trying to find the right one. It all starts with some initial communication, some pre-sale process, and on this stage, you already can have some kind of red flags for you to understand whether you should continue the communication and afterwards partnership with that vendor or not. Afterwards, it goes execution. On execution stage, there are also a lot of red flags which you can detect and understand that the product won't be delivered as discussed by the deadlines or at all. Also, we're gonna jump a bit into whether you can detect from the let's say technical side whether the project has been delivered or not, even if you're not a developer and have never had an experience to code yourself. And the final stage, when the product is being transferred to you, at this point, you would probably already understand that if there was nothing that there is going to be nothing that the vendor going to provide you. But at this point, you can understand the quality of the job being done, and it's like the final countdown. Let's put it this way. Yeah. So where it all begins, you start to look for the vendor for your next software project, and probably the first thing which you do, you just Google, you find some kind of options for you, and that's where you should start to understand whether you start to assess the vendors. The most obvious one is to understand whether the vendor has the website, and if so, it's already a good sign. There are various repositories where you can search for various agencies. For instance, the most well-known one is Clutch. It's a repository of hundreds of thousands of vendors, and for many types of jobs, but mostly they're concentrating on software development. And in there, you're able to find some information about them, links to their website, and the most important, clients' reviews. I would say that 70% of reviews there are the ones you can stand behind, and they're basically true. Some agencies creating the fake ones, but still, if there are more than 10 reviews, you should expect that at least 7 of those are the real ones. There are other repositories like GoodForms, and you can search for others online, but Clutch is the way to begin. Also, after you have reviewed these platforms, you can look through whether they have an Upwork profile, go through their Facebook page and Google Business. Sometimes you would be able to find a couple of reviews there. So this should also be quite helpful for you to understand whether there is some bad background for these agencies, at least from the reviews. Not so obvious one is to go on the local job websites. Why? Because if you have found some vendor, you can go to the job websites of their country and to see the reviews of their employees. There is a big chance when your vendor has several, or I don't know, many bad reviews from the employees, the people assigned to your project not going to be motivated and not going to be interested into delivering perfect job. So that's also one of the points you shouldn't neglect. Yep. And when you start the communication with them, with the vendor, you can already ask them for the reference from existing clients and just ask to set up the call. If you have pinpointed in the reviews or in the portfolio some of the clients which projects you liked, or the ones which are similar to yours, it would be nice to ask them to connect you to that particular client. In this way, you can just also understand whether they have really delivered this product or not. In some cases, in portfolio, you can find some of the projects which were not a part of the job being done by that or particular agency. Yeah. And the last thing you can do is just research whether they have a physical office. Yeah, there are not that many cases. Maybe you have friends who live in the same country who can go there, meet them, and communicate with them. But also, you can just Google it and find whether there is office or not. Yeah, so we've done with the essential checkup, and we move on to the pre-sale process. So you have some project on your hand, and you transfer this information to the vendor of interest. This is when you start the scoping of your project. Usually on the pre-sale, during the pre-sale, it's kind of complicated to scope out your project in very much detail, but you already can have some high-level breakdown of what's needed to be done in order for a project to go live. So basically, what you need to look for is a vendor who's going to be asking you a lot of questions, because when there is not asking enough questions, when the estimates for your project are being provided extremely fast, like less than in a day, then probably they're not sure of what they have just estimated, and yeah, you should be cautious about that. Usually in Fulcrum, for us, it takes for middle-sized project at least, like not at least, but we have a KPI of having like a 1 week from our from the moment when we understood like at a high level what you need, what exactly you need to proposal per se and the estimate. So you should look for a vendor who's going to be asking a lot of the question and challenging the hypothesis you may have, because in many cases we have stumbled into some projects where we just haven't understood some of the business logic, some of the I don't know, monetization the client wanted to implement, etc. And yeah, just trying to challenge and to understand from where the client is coming from. Yeah, that would be quite helpful during the pre-sale process as well. Another thing which you should look for, and which can be kind of a red flag for you as well, is when when vendor is not presenting any of the tech team members to you, because there is a slight chance they don't have in-house team at all, and they're working mostly with the freelancers or just reselling your project to some other vendors. So ask for some tech lead or maybe some developers who are going to be involved into your project to be presented on the call, just to meet with them, just to chit chat, and I don't know, just to understand that such people are in place in that particular agency. Yeah, so we went over all of these points, and I think those are probably the most important ones during the pre-sale process. So moving on to the proposal checkup. You had some communication with the vendor, you have scoped out the project to some degree, and you're waiting for the proposal itself, for the estimate of the budget the project may need. So what this proposal should include? The most important is probably the roadmap. So basically, in the roadmap, you're gonna see some the high-level breakdown of the stages which your project gonna involve, and you're gonna understand that at this particular time you're gonna have this chunk of work delivered, and in another sprint you're gonna have another chunk delivered, as well as just to understand the deadlines. Usually, depending on how many materials you're able to provide and how much time you had to discuss your project, it would be quite a high level roadmap starting like from 3 to 6 months, for example. It's During this process, it's complicated to have an exact deadline, so you shouldn't expect the robust deadline during the proposal. So the good sign is that there are going to be some fork because there are so many things which you haven't understood yet, which you haven't discussed yet and put on the paper. So moving from there should be some breakdown on the feature set that you have. The more decomposed the project is, the better. So basically, each feature which is gonna be delivered by vendor should be on the list, and you can have like approximate timeline for each particular feature set, and all of these hours can go into the roadmap afterwards. The good sign also is when each and every project has a project manager and quality assurance engineer. We had experience of some of our previous clients. So basically, he was trying to change the vendor he was working, and one of the major issues they had was the absence of quality assurance engineer on the project, and they had to spend quite a while on testing the app itself. But not only that, they didn't expect that the release is going to be in such a shape which they will provide it. So you should definitely look and ask the vendor if quality assurance engineer is going to be on the project and what exactly he or she going to be doing on this project. Also, always quite important to understand with which technology you're going to be working. So in proposal, the tech stack on the front end, back end, cloud architecture, databases, etc. Everything should be included so you understand what's going to be there. Also, it's quite crucial to understand how much it's going to take to support the platform you're building. So if you're building some product from scratch, you need to understand that after the MVP being delivered, and in case you don't want to enhance it or work on it any further, but you just want to test it on the market, that there are going to be some budget involved into maintenance and support of the platform. So for the maintenance, you should ask for a cloud architecture and some rough estimates on how much you're going to be spending for this amount or that amount of users. So there should be a breakdown, and you need to understand that with scaling of the platform, the maintenance should go up. And in terms of the support, you should have some team members involved, at least several hours a month in order to support your app. Probably several hours a week, not a month. And so they're going to be assigned to the product to just to monitor whether the application is up, whether there are no major bugs, and in case some bugs occur, for someone to work on them. And on top of that, the roadmap should always include some preparation, or we call it discovery phase. So basically, it's not possible to start each and every software project from the get-go, and it's always needed some preparation before the start. So usually you would have some tech lead on this, the project manager, the business analyst, and the other team members preparing all of the business documentation in order to project to kick off. On top of that, just for the development team to create some project setup in order to start the development per se. Ideally, this should take from 2 to 5 weeks for medium-sized projects. Yep. So basically, if you don't have any preparation and you have just the start and the end of the development, you should be cautious about that. Moving, yeah. So this is the how the roadmap should usually look like. So you understand in which sprint you're gonna get this or that feature set. And we're gonna jump a bit deeper into this when we're gonna be talking about the execution. So, and this is how we do the breakdown of feature set during the pre-sale process. So basically, you can see each and every task in here, and we have the estimates for hours for the front end, back end engineers, for the quality assurance, and for the project manager. So every task is put into this table, and you can see that for this particular feature, we're gonna spend around this time, for that, another time. Yeah. So finally, you've been provided by the proposal is along the lines which you have expected or you haven't expected, but you can live with that because you understand that it's probably okay. So right now you have to do some agreement check. Obviously, it's much better to do this from the lawyer side and not to do it yourself. But in case you're in this situation, you just scroll through the agreement by yourself. The important things you should remember about is having the vendor's jurisdiction in the agreement. In many cases, agencies just sign with the jurisdiction of the client, but basically this agreement doesn't make any sense. And we have been in such situations when we were provided with such agreements. Also, a huge red flag is when vendor would ask you for the prepayment of the whole project or of the half of the project, especially for projects which are 3 or 6 months into the development. One of our existing clients, they have had such an experience when they have kicked off work with the vendor, and the vendor asked for the prepayment of 50 to 80% of the whole project and just disappeared in 3 to 4 weeks. And we're talking like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of dollars. So this can be quite a red flag for you, but quite an obvious one. But sometimes people forget about this. Yeah. Also, agreement should always include the acceptance criteria. Basically, you have some guidelines on how the product should work, and you understand that here and there is the red lines, and beyond these red lines, there should not be any issues. Usually, it's the main flows of your application which should be working without major bugs. On top of that, all of the intellectual property should be on your side, because there are some cases when vendors trying to reuse the code base of the products which they have developed for particular clients, and but this is kind of a red flag as well. Yep. So we are moving on to the execution and product delivery. So, as I mentioned before, each project starts with the planning and some initial stage. What you should have at this moment on your side is project plan and the decomposition of the sprints. Basically, that's the roadmap I have already mentioned, but during the planning stage, it should become much more detailed and decomposed. So you should understand the deliverables of each particular sprint or milestone, in a detail. So on top of that, you should negotiate with your vendor when you're gonna have the demo of your product. Basically, once in 1 or 2 weeks, your vendor should provide you with a meeting where they're gonna be showing all of the work which has already been done, and afterwards providing the release for you. So you'll be able to test out what they have shown on demo. If there are no schedule for demo, and especially if there are no demos at all, then it's probably something is going wrong. So also during this stage of planning, you should be able to meet all of the team members assigned to the project. Obviously, it's not necessary, but just to meet some of the team members and to understand who exactly going to be working on your project can be helpful, and yeah, should be helpful. Yeah. So also on this stage, the tech lead should have the final version of the product architecture, so you understand what kind of just what kind of architecture and third-party integrations you're gonna have. But at this point, it should be much more clear for you the cloud architecture, the product architecture, what kind of integrations is going to be used. Because if there are still some misunderstanding, there can be created some major architectural mistakes, which you won't be able to fix in the long run, and you're just gonna have to rewrite the whole project from the scratch. So afterwards, you start the development itself. It's always a good sign when vendor provides you an access to Jira, so you're able to see the progress on a daily basis. You can just log in to see task being done task by task. Also, it's important for you to align the communication channels. We prefer to use Slack just for the convenience and the speed, and yeah, it works quite well. It can be any other alternative, but you should have some kind of workspace communication. Also, you have to check whether you have an access to GitLab or GitHub, and how often commits are made. So if you don't have any commits in a couple of days, especially weeks, it's a major red flag, and probably no work was done at this point. So it's quite healthy just to check whether there are some commits in place. Also, it's helpful when vendor can communicate the blockers and the risks which you're gonna have along the line of the product development. When you are wearing the pink glasses, and the vendor is always saying that everything is going as planned, we have no issues. In software development, there are always at least something gonna go wrong at this or that particular moment. From the get-go, you need to understand what kind of risks you can stumble upon. And for each particular risk, it would be helpful to have a risk plan of what things we're gonna do in order to mitigate it. Also, quite important for each sprint to understand whether we are going on the schedule or not, because being on the schedule, being in terms of the roadmap discussed in the very beginning, is quite important for a budget and can be the major point in order to understand whether you're still on the budget or not. So ideally, what you would need to have is the roadmap, which you had in the very beginning, and the actual roadmap, which you can compare in each particular moment. That can be quite helpful to understand whether all of the deadlines discussed are still in place, as well as understand whether you're going to need to spend much more time and money for the product delivery. Yeah, and obviously some bi-weekly reports from your project manager would be quite helpful. Usually each particular company has its own standards on what should be on that report, but you can always ask for some particular things you would like to include into the report. Yep. And if there are no any reports, obviously there is something can go wrong. So here just the example of commits made. Yep. If we talk about quality assurance and why is it important and what you need to have on your hands. So during the project planning or the discovery, quality assurance lead usually creates the creates the test plans, test cases, and other documentation. So you need to have an access to the test plans and reports in order to understand what particular job is being done by quality assurance engineer in that moment. Basically, it's a table in which you can see which bugs have occurred and on which flows they have occurred. And another major point is when you're provided some build after the demo, there are no crucial bugs. Crucial bugs are the one which make it impossible to use the app. So basically the main flow is not working. There can be some minor things which were overlooked, and it's obviously happens probably during each build, but no critical bugs should be there. And if we talk about releases, if the app is being released for users to work with it, you should be obviously know that. So no release should go without your knowledge or without your approval. Usually the build is being provided to you for the approval, for you to go through it, to understand whether we have delivered what we have discussed with you and what you understood in the very beginning, and for what you're looking for your users to use. So basically, you should always know if there are going to be some release on the production version of your app. Yeah, so on top of that, as mentioned before, users should not find any critical bugs after the release. And the same as going for the build, in some cases you would not be able to determine those critical bugs, but when you have thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users, they usually are able to determine much more bugs. And if there is some critical bug which occur after the release, that's kind of a big problem for you. So on top of that, if the vendor is telling you that the release is gonna be postponed and there are no arguments for it being postponed, it's another red flag, and you should look into what's going on and be much more cautious. And finally, if the analytics are not set up before the release, it's also another major red flag for you, and you should have a long and complicated discussion with your vendor. So, and we're at the final stage where the project is being transferred to you from your vendor. So you should check whether you have all of the access to all of the design materials. You should check whether you have a full ownership of the code base. Go through the tech documentation, and usually it should be readable for everyone and understandable for everyone. So it should include the architecture, and some other points, and be sure that you have all of the business documentation created during the development. The first and most important one is the product requirement documentation. It's basically the overview of your whole project, of each and every feature, and it should be quite a detailed document. You should have a changelog. That's the list of things which you have initially not thought about, but afterwards decided to have them in the app. And basically, that's some changes which occurred during the development. Yep. Um, there should be some user testing materials and all of the research you've done hand in hand with your vendor. So quite a lot of things need to be transferred to you. And if there is no things like that, especially some tech documentation, it's a good sign that there was some major issues during the development, and it's complicated for a vendor to collect all of the information together. And also, yeah, I think for this one, that's pretty much it. Yeah. So one sec. So finally, where you should be looking for a vendor, the most common the most common thing is to go to your friends and people who are in the industry and to ask around whether they have had a good or bad experience with some vendors. And usually this is what works the best. And for most of the agencies, this is the biggest stream. I mean, for the good agencies, this is the biggest stream of new clients. Also, you can go on the Clutch and Upwork, just remembering, or any other repository. Just to remember what we have discussed in the very beginning, just do your research before committing, working with some of the agencies from there. Also, what can be helpful is for vendor having some awards. I wouldn't say this should be the major point, but yeah, this can be quite a sign that they're doing okay. And yeah, just don't forget to do your homework, check essentials, and usually if it's too good of a deal, it's not. And yeah, just don't fall for that. That's pretty much it. And okay, yeah. So basically, we have created the vendor checklist. It's the list of things you have to go through during the uh, during the uh, during the stage where you're looking for the vendor, during the stage where you're in the cooperation, and basically everything what we discussed, but much more into the details. And on top of that, with some of the examples and how-tos. So if you need it, just share your email, and afterwards we're gonna have it live on our website on Product Hunt. You'll be able to download it, use it, and yeah, that's gonna be quite cool for everyone looking for a development partner. Yeah, so for now, I think it's pretty much it. Maybe you have some questions. Yeah, you have. Yeah, we can go to the Q&A if there are some people still live, and I see there were a couple of questions. So the first one, how can I be sure that Fulcrum or another software company do an honest estimation? Yeah, it's quite easy. You just go to several vendors, and the one which provided you the longest and the most expensive one is usually the most honest one. Yeah, but it's complicated. You can consult with some of your more technical friends, but the longest and the most expensive is usually the most honest one, and vice versa, the cheapest and the fastest is usually now. At what stages of application development can I save? It's complicated to say. You can always save it, but it's not usually cost effective to save it at later stages. The It's always possible to save it, but in some cases you need to involve too much I know energy, time, and budget in order to make it live, and sometimes it's more cost effective. It's more cost effective just to have it rewritten from the ground. Yeah, but the sooner you detect that the vendor is not doing a good job, the biggest chance that you're gonna be able to save it. Um, what kind of research are you conducting before going in for development? Um, yeah, so our process, which we perform before the start of any product development, is discover stage. We have different packages for it, starting from just writing all of the necessary stuff like product requirement documentation, doing the interviews just with the stakeholders from the client side, and doing some initial designs, creation, etc. So it's basically creating the bare minimum for the product development to kick off. It usually works for MVPs in which you're like 100% sure that yeah, that's what the market needs, and you are pretty sure about the functionality you want to develop, and you have already done your research on you have already done the research on your side. In other cases, we have a more prolific discovery where we dive much deeper and conduct not only the stakeholder interviews, but conduct the user interviews with the hypothesis provided from client side, from our side. We try to validate them as much as possible. After that, create some kind of initial prototypes, go to the users again, work in the iterative process in order to understand much better what should be developed, and only after that create the final designs and write down the product requirement documentation and going into the development per se. Usually it saves a lot of time and money to have a more prolific discovery beforehand, so you develop the things which make sense. Yeah. When you should delegate the development of the app to the vendor instead of developed by yourself, when you are a software development company. So when you're once again, when you should delegate the development of the app to the vendor instead of developed by yourself, usually when you're not familiar with writing the code, or to be honest, in most of the cases, it's better, especially if you have one or two people on the project, I don't know, founders, etc. I would say that you just need a strong tech support from other side, even if you're a developer, because there are so many things you have to concentrate during this initial stage that in most cases it's much more efficient to give the work to someone else, unless you have the resources and you have the experience and you have everything else in order to set up your own team and move into the development of the MVP or the product itself. But in most of the cases, I would say right now it's more cost effective to go to the agency to do that for you. Not only cost, time, and many other and and as a founder, you usually need to focus on much different things. Can we skip the discovery stage? How long does it take? Yep. No, no, you cannot. You cannot move on without the discovery stage or some preparation. Obviously, when you have done your research, and even if you have product some product requirement documentation, and you're from the product background, we still need some time in order to go through all of the materials, understand whether those materials are to the standards of ours. On top of that, just to research the best way to create the product and bring life to it. Yep. Um, can you help me to get investment as the company? By the way, you missed my question above. Okay. Uh, can I? Yeah. So, can we help to get investment to your company? I wouldn't say that because it's a lot of commitment to put on our side, saying that with us you're gonna get investment 100%. What we usually can do is to create the prototype and the product, which would to 90% chance going to make some sense. And with the outcomes of our research, with the outcomes of the user interviews, with the outcomes of some market research, there is a much better chance that you're going to get some investment. Does the company use client code for other projects? No, we don't use. There are some cases where companies do, but unless you agree with your vendor that you're okay with that, it's not a big problem. Some of the companies right now practice that. You share the rights for the code, and in case the vendor gets some of the clients with the similar platform as yours, you're getting like a cashback, something like that, from the new client to you, just because you have shared the rights for the code. We don't do that yet, or not planning to do. We'll see. It just depends on whether our client's going to be open for that or interested in that. Yeah. But in some cases, agencies just reuse it. But still, it's not the practice you should look for, because you won't be able to save a lot by doing so. What percentage of projects in your company are successful? Yeah, it really depends on what you mean by successful. Um, because if you mean that we have, whether we have delivered the project as discussed, or something like that, then 100% of projects were a success, because we were able to deliver the project. It was live, etc. But if you talk about whether all of the projects we have been working on were success from the business side, unfortunately, no. But in many cases, we don't have a full control. I mean, in all of the cases, we don't have full control over that. In in what cases does the development agency actually decides to outsource development? In some cases, when you're building complex platforms and you have a lot of tech involved into that, you have to use different languages, etc. You need to use the expertise outside of your realm. For instance, we don't have experts for every language, for every API integrated, or I don't know, for everything else. Yeah. So sometimes we need some support from other agencies to help us to deliver some part of the job, or we just helping our clients to with some services which we don't really provide, but we have an access to agencies in Ukraine, and we are able just to cover this part of job by going to them, validating them, and afterwards providing the deliverables to our clients. Um, should I hire one vendor to do whole scope, design development, or is it better to order these services from different companies with exact expertise in design and exact expertise in development? Yeah, it really depends. In most of the cases, due to the miscommunication and some other problems, putting blame on each other, it's complicated to work with two different agencies, and it's much better for especially startups to have one company covering all of it, because the speed of response, the speed of some changes is much faster when people are sitting in one room, or even if they're not sitting in one room, but they know each other and they're able to communicate much faster. So I would say that for some companies, it's much better to have one vendor covering both design and development. But if you're looking for something specific, I don't know, some for some big companies, or for some companies looking to have some uh, exquisite design and separately exquisite development, and they have all the time in the world, it's probably, it makes some sense to have different vendors. Okay, so uh, I think we are done with the questions, and we are done with the timing. Thanks for everyone. Thank you everyone for joining in. Hope it wasn't. Hope that was helpful for you, and it will help you not to make any mistakes when choosing your next vendor. And yeah, have a great night. Bye bye.